Today I'm going to switch it up a little bit, talk about my top 5 guitar albums of all time. I've also got some honorable mentions in there. Wanted to switch it up. We're always doing guitar reviews and demos, but today it's all about the music that inspires us, me in particular. Let's talk about it. How's it going, y'all? This is Cooper Greenberg here at Alamo Music Center in San Antonio, Texas. You can find us online at alamomusic.com. If you haven't already subscribed to the channel, like and comment on the videos, check out the Patreon, check out the podcast, all that stuff. And you know, if you want some cool t-shirts, check out the Teespring. But like I said, I want to talk about my top 5 guitar albums today over on our piano and keyboard channel. If you're following that one, you might have seen Patrick and Theodore doing their top 5 piano albums. There's a lot of good stuff in there, a lot of good debate, and so I kind of want this one to, one, inspire my counterpart Chris McKee to come up with his top 5 and talk about that as well. But I also would love to hear y'all's top 5 down in the comments, hear if you agree or disagree with me. And hopefully we can get kind of a community movement of everybody tossing around great guitar albums to inspire everyone. But I brought sort of a record collection in here for visual aid today. And what I did is I've been going through my Spotify, going through my albums at home, and finding the ones that I think were most formative for me, both old and new. So we're just gonna dive in. And when I grew up, when I started playing, first guitar that my parents gave me when I was about 7, 8 years old was a Stratocaster. Obviously, my first hero was Jimi Hendrix, so I gotta pick a Hendrix album on the list. Now this is number 5, it's tough to rank these, but I wanted to throw some Hendrix in there, and this is the one that I think has inspired me the most, that I think has the coolest kind of guitar lore behind it. This is Hendrix in the West. It's a compilation live album with a bunch of incredible tracks from all over, tours that he did in the late 60s, early 70s, you know. Just an incredible record, and it shows kind of Jimi at, I think, his best. You know, studio albums are great. Are You Experienced almost made the list. I also love Electric Ladyland, Axis Bold as Love. The studio records are awesome, but this shows Jimi kind of in where I imagine at the time was his actual natural habitat. And it's got Sgt. Pepper's on here, which is one of the coolest rock and roll stories ever. It is not the recording from that night, but if you don't know, 3 days after the Beatles put out Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, Jimi Hendrix went out and played the song when it was brand new to a crowd that Paul McCartney and George Harrison were a part of, and it was a total surprise. It was really cool. Power move on Jimi Hendrix's part, and it's like super raw, and some of the words are different, and it's literally like he just listened to it backstage with the band. He said, let's go do this. Pretty cool, sort of legendary piece of music history. That is probably essential listening on this album, but if you want to listen to what I like the best, there's also a cover of Johnny B. Good on here that is absolutely incredible. So number 5, Hendrix in the West, Sgt. Pepper's, Johnny B. Good. There's a great rendition of Red House on here that takes up the entire side too. It's a double album. It's just super cool. So a nod to my first hero, Jimi Hendrix, with Hendrix in the West. Number 4, which again, this is really hard to choose one album by this band, but it's gotta be Houses of the Holy, Led Zeppelin. One of the coolest, you know, album designs. Incredible. And I think the visual aspect of an album is very important on top of the music that's inside, but this one is an eye catcher for sure. Houses of the Holy, the song, is not on this album, which is pretty crazy. That track went on Physical Graffiti after this record. But, you know, I've been a big Led Zeppelin fan also since my early days of playing guitar. And, you know, it's fun to think about Jimmy Page when he played a Telly, when he played a Les Paul, all that stuff, when he played his double neck. There's a lot of great lore behind Jimmy Page himself, but in my circle with my friends, he's often referred to as Sloppy Jim, because sometimes it's like, what is this guy doing up there? Especially in the live recordings. I could get murdered for saying that, but it's no secret that Sloppy Jim was, notorious for playing some funky stuff. I think that House of the Holy is a great example of some of his best riff work. When it comes to essential listening for me, probably, this album's incredible. You got Dancing Days, No Quarter, The Ocean. I would say The Ocean's probably the one that if you've never heard of Led Zeppelin before, if you never heard Jimmy Page play, which is 100% none of you, but if you want a refresher, check out The Ocean, that huge time signature and key change at the very end of the song, jamming out at the end of the album. Incredible guitar work, but I'm going to do this with all of these. I'm going to say an essential song that the guitarist needs to listen to and then drop my favorite track. My favorite track on this album is the Rain song. It's some of the most beautiful, kind of orchestrated, epic. You think about Led Zeppelin, they're half, boozy blues rock with a bunch of schoolboy humor kind of thing, and then the other half is like epic orchestrated, war cry songs like Kashmir and 10 Years Gone and all that. I think Rain Song is one of the most beautiful just compositions in rock history. So Houses of the Holy, take a listen to The Ocean, Rain Song. Now we're going to switch it up a little bit. For me, number 3, it was hard to order these, like I said, but it's easy to throw all the guitar heroes in there and have your Jimmys, both Page and Hendrix variety. But I've talked a lot on this channel about probably my favorite artist all time, somebody who does not get as much credit that he deserves on guitar, because he's got one guitar. His name is Trigger. Willie Nelson, Red-Headed Stranger is going to be my number 3. This is also a record that is incredibly raw. I believe the story goes that he turned in the record to the label and they thought it was all demos that, these are some good ideas. Let's go in the studio and cut the record. And those are the versions that made it on the album. And my band, Favorite Son, and I, we did a complete front-to-back cover show of this album at a venue here in town called the Lonesome Rose. I think it's some of the most understated and beautiful guitar playing. Everybody knows, when you listen to Willie Nelson, you hear that almost bad-sounding nylon string. It's a very distinct sound. It's his classic Martin nylon string Trigger that's got a bunch of holes in it, and it's all torn up, and it's got signatures everywhere. This is the album that I believe really brought Trigger to the forefront of his music, really gained that notorious, kind of reputation for that guitar itself. And Willie, was a massive Django Reinhardt fan. He loved the gypsy jazz kind of variety of music, and he really incorporates that. It's, sparse, and he leaves so much space, but never plays a wrong note. Obviously, you got to listen to Blue Eyes Crying in the Rain on this one because it is kind of the single. He didn't write it, but he recorded the best version on this album. So you got to listen to that for your imperative listening. And my favorite track, probably in terms of guitar and orchestration, is the last track. It's an instrumental. It's called Bandera. And it's just a beautiful melody played through in a few different variations. Really beautiful song. Red-Headed Stranger as number 3. Check it out. So keeping with the incredible acoustic guitar playing on this list, my number 2, which is getting tougher and tougher, is going to be Ladies of the Canyon by Joni Mitchell. Now, like most people, I guess, it depends on who most people are. Maybe newer fans of Joni Mitchell, younger fans that weren't around when she was actually putting out these classic records. I started with Blue and I started with Court and Spark. Those are 2 incredible albums. They almost made it on here. There's a lot of great guitar work, but those are also centered around a lot of other instruments. I think while there is a ton of piano and extra stuff on Ladies of the Canyon, it is some of my favorite guitar work of hers. She is a master of alternate tunings and just incredible chord progressions and really experimental stuff for the time when she's doing Laurel Canyon folk music. And Ladies of the Canyon became very special for me over the last few years. I have spent a little time in Topanga Canyon. I'm a big fan of just the entire vibe and the history of the music scene out there. So this is a very special album to me. When I first heard that intro guitar that's almost chorusy, 12-string, kind of panned, I mentioned it in the video a long time ago, but the title track, Ladies of the Canyon, has beautiful, unintuitive chord changes and a ton of just incredible musicianship. So that's essential listening on this one. And unfortunately, you can't get it on Spotify because you know why. You've heard that story. But I mean, there's so many good songs on this album. The Circle Game is probably my favorite song, maybe Morning Morgantown. I'm going to say your essential listening is Ladies of the Canyon, and maybe my favorite's going to be Circle Game. Just classic folk music and nothing insane or groundbreaking on the guitar, but just this album's got a lot to dive into, a lot to unpack. Ladies of the Canyon is number 2. Now, that's my 5 through 2, and before we get to number 1, I want to mention some honorable mentions, so hold on. I'm going to blow through these because it was really hard for me to pick, and you might already see what's on my lap. Tommy, this is the original copy from my mom's record collection back when it first came out. One of my prized possessions in my collection. This is an album that not only just blows the entire strange rock opera pinball story out of proportion, and it's a very interesting and horrifying story that's gross. But there is a great all bluegrass cover of this album by the Hillbenders. I got to see it performed live. Totally opened my eyes to, you know, how this opera can be transposed into all these different genres. But the thing that really hooked me on this is in the overture, 1921, It's a Boy kind of bit at the very beginning when you're diving in. There is a part where Pete Townshend's doing acoustic, and it pans across left and right, and just this short little acoustic solo. The whole thing has, you know, every kind of instrument because it's an overture, it's an opera, it's this big old musical movement. But right at the beginning, after you get all these little pieces that signal the themes of the album, you get this awesome acoustic bit from Pete Townshend, and that's kind of echoed throughout the whole thing. There's amazing acoustic playing. All the modal stuff just in the opening of Pinball Wizard is incredible. And a ton of great riffs. So Tommy's got to be on the list. Now, next, I got to choose something that's a little newer. And those who know me know that I'm a massive Sturgill Simpson fan. So I knew I had to pick something of his. And he's got a few different phases in there, right? High Top Mountain, straightforward country, great record. And then he totally switched gears with meta-modern sounds and country music. After that, Sailor's Guide, totally different sound with the horns and the orchestra, and kind of put the guitar that was so forward in those first 2 records a little bit in the background, but you know, there was some great guitar on that record anyway. Sound and Fury, the Ballad of Dude and Juanita, great records, all in different genres, but what I think is essential listening is the Cut and Grass collection. I've got volume 1 here. Now, if you don't know Sturgill, go check out all those albums I just mentioned. If you have not heard Cut and Grass, but you're a fan of Sturgill's music, he went in the studio over the pandemic and recut everything sort of in its original intention, which was bluegrass music, and he's cutting grass in the studio. So he's running through pretty much his entire discography from the Sunday Valley stuff all the way through Sailor's Guide, and this album has incredible players on it. Sturgill plays a lot of guitar on it, but he put together what he calls the Hillbilly Avengers, which is pretty cool. And most of the guitar that he plays on here is rhythm. Tim O'Brien does a ton of the lead bluegrass work. The key here is Sierra Hull. She's playing mandolin, and these are not my top 5 mandolin albums, but she pretty much takes the cake on the whole album, and you get this incredible photo of his Martin Dreadnought. So, Cut and Grass, if you're not a Sturgill fan, but you want to get into and listen to some of the best players in the world playing incredible music on strings, you got banjo and double bass, guitar, mandolin and fiddle, some great drum work from Miles Miller as well. Cut and Grass, Volume 1. Also honorable mention, A Ghost is Born by Wilco. This is a pretty fantastic record, and it is the record right after Yankee Hotel Foxtrot, kind of the quintessential Wilco's best album if you ask anybody else, because it was sort of their Kid A, maybe, if we're talking Radiohead comparisons. Maybe my top 2 favorite bands, who knows? I mean, I'm saying favorite a lot. You know it changes every day, but Radiohead did OK Computer, and then they went complete left turn with Kid A. Wilco does their OK Computer, which is, say, Yankee Hotel Foxtrot, and then they drop this, which is A Ghost is Born, 2004. Takes inspiration from a ton of different genres. There's some kind of krautrock stuff. So, say, essential listening, at least that's what you said, opening track. It's Jeff Tweedy on a lot of the guitar stuff on this record, and it's really good. This is the album right before Sky Blue Sky, where Nels Cline came into the band, and he's complete otherworldly virtuoso. So you got your Impossible Germany and all that stuff from Sky Blue Sky and onward. But A Ghost is Born is such a raw, very heavy-duty, punch-you-in-the-face, rudimentary guitar sound, which I think is really important and very cool. Spiders, Kid Smoke is like a 9-minute jam that is incredible. So A Ghost is Born is on the list. Couple more here before we get to number 1. I'll blow through them. This was my number 2 with Led Zeppelin that almost made the cut instead of Houses of the Holy, Led Zeppelin 3. It's probably their folkiest album. I mean, it's got the big hits, you know, it's got Immigrant Song, Since I've Been Loving You, really good electric music, but Gallows Pole, Tangerine, That's the Way, Brawny R. Stomp. Incredible record for the acoustic side and folky side of Led Zeppelin, and just one of my favorite album covers as well. They pretty much did some of the coolest album artwork, and in that vein, Deloused in the Comatorium by Mars Volta. One of the albums that took me out of my I have to play classic rock and blues all day, every day phase when I first heard it. It's some of the most challenging to listen to and also to play guitar work, but I think once you kind of dive in and you understand what they're doing, it's one of the coolest albums ever. My favorite song is probably Televators, but Deloused in the Comatorium, this is probably in my top 5 most prized LPs that I own, and I think it's worth it. You know, for me, there were a couple different forks in the road. I was always playing AC/DC when I grew up, and Led Zeppelin and Jimi Hendrix. And then I started getting into country music because Maurice Munter, salesman extraordinaire of Alamo Music lore, gave me a country music guitar licks book. And so I started listening to that. And then when I got into Tool and I got into more progressive rock stuff, Yes and Rush and everything, I came upon Mars Volta by a ton of different recommendations. And this album, just trying to learn all these riffs, kind of broke my brain a little bit. So if you want some challenges, check out Deloused in the Comatorium. Next, I got to throw in an Allman Brothers record because that's some of my favorite guitar work of all time from Duane Allman. My favorite song probably by them in the world is Jessica because every single instrument shines. This is Brothers and Sisters. Obviously, Eat a Peach. It's hard to choose between those two, but I picked this one because Jessica is on it. And Ramblin' Man. You know, it's the quintessential Southern rock, jam rock, harmonized guitar, truly beautiful kind of encapsulation of that sound at that time. Brothers and Sisters, Allman Brothers. And my last honorable mention before we get into my number 1 is Apostrophe by Frank Zappa. This album also pretty challenging. I mean, it's got some hella good riffs, and it's probably, while challenging, maybe the most palatable Frank Zappa album. Maybe Hot Rats, I don't know. But this album, I think, is the most listenable front to back by Frank Zappa. My favorite song is Uncle Remus, but that's not a guitar song. I would say when you get in the first movement, Don't Eat the Yellow Snow, Nanook rubs it. There's some really cool, awesome Frank Zappa screaming guitar licks in there, and then the apostrophe riff is pretty classic. So Frank Zappa, if you have not, it's very hot in here. If you have not looked at all the different modifications that he's done or he did on his guitars and they were kind of inherited by his son Dweezil. You can see the Zappa Plays Zappa, videos. He was one of the most creative guitar players in the world in terms of mechanically and also musically. And so if you're not a Frank Zappa fan, but you fancy yourself a guitar aficionado, you got to get past that. You got to get past the weirdness and the cynical nature and the sardonic grin of Frank Zappa and dive in and hear some of the most beautiful stuff that was written for guitar, i.e. Peaches and Regalia, not on this record, but one of my favorite guitar solos that's like doubled with a flute. It's very, very cool and experimental. So these are my honorable mentions, but now on to number one. I would like to know if anybody guessed this, but my number one guitar album of all time is going to be All Things Must Pass by George Harrison. This is both a longtime favorite of mine and also a current time favorite of mine. So that's probably why it landed in the spot. Any given day, many of these other ones could have been in number one, but I think I'm in my George Harrison life phase right now. I cannot stop listening to him, especially this album. I have to thank Fender because they were the ones that sent me this, which is very cool and nice of them. I do their Fender Academy stuff, and this was sort of my prize for 2022, 21, one of those. So I got this anniversary box set edition, which I have never had in my collection, so I'm glad to have it. But if you watch Get Back, and you fell in love again with George Harrison, even though he was a moody guy, and you were blown away that All Things Must Pass was not put on the record in those sessions, then you should probably check out a documentary called Living in the Material World, directed by Martin Scorsese. It's on HBO Max. Really incredible documentary, all about George Harrison and his life and his idiosyncrasies and his beliefs, and mainly his approach to music. So this album is pretty much perfect and in its very imperfect way, which I guess you can say about George Harrison himself. So I'd Have You Anytime opens up the album, song written, I think, with and sort of about Bob Dylan, beautiful song. And then you get into My Sweet Lord, which is the classic. It's got that amazing harmonized riff, obviously kind of the same reason I love his playing. Similar to Allman Brothers, it's like the slide stuff and the harmonization. It's beautiful, very vocal sounding. But I mean, this is a triple album, so you got a ton of different material in here. I would say my favorite song right now is probably Run of the Mill or Awaiting on You All. Both really great, kind of deeper cuts from this album. But when it comes to George Harrison, he was a beautiful person. His guitar playing, I think, evokes his personality, and they are so in sync, more so than many other guitar players. Part of the thing is, like, with all of these albums, say with Jimi Hendrix, it's erratic and it's crazy and it's loud, but it's experimental and it's revolutionary, just like the person himself. And, I think the same could be said. Joni Mitchell, it was an eccentric person. She still is. She's still in present tense, but at the time, she was eccentric, and she was making jazz, pop, acoustic, folk fusion, and as a person and as a guitar player, musician, they align. And I think that personality and playing style align at the apex with George Harrison. So if you're, say, a Beatles fan, but you never thought that the solo stuff was any good, as good as all of the full band Beatles together stuff, I challenge you to listen to Plastic Ono Band and Band on the Run and All Things Must Pass, and tell me that, one, they weren't all incredible by themselves, but also this is, I think, the most fully realized and incredible project from a former Beatle. George Harrison, All Things Must Pass is my number one guitar album, and I got the cool 50th anniversary box set right here. But now it's time for y'all to try your best to compile what your top fives are and list them in the comments below. Tell me what you thought of mine. If you think that I need more modern stuff in here, I might agree, but it's pretty hard to say anybody's done it as well as the 60s and 70s legends. But let me know your top five. Maybe make some predictions for every Phil Keaggy album that's going to be on Chris's top five. But if you've made it this far, thank you for listening to me gush about my favorite records. We'll definitely get more top 5 lists in here because I watched high fidelity when I was younger, and now I think everything having to do with music has to be put in a top 5 list. But let me know if you agree or disagree or what I missed. And if you want to know about any of the guitars, including the George Harrison Telecaster that at the time of filming this video, we still have not gotten in stock yet, and I apologize to the 2 of you who have already purchased those. But if you want to know, say, I love Jimi Hendrix, what's the best Strat that I could buy right now to make me sound like Hendrix? Probably none of them, but we'll try to help you find it. I'll try to help you find the guitar that best emulates your heroes, and I want to know your favorite music so we can start that conversation and give me recommendations. If you want to learn more about the stuff that we got at the store, go to alamomusic.com. If you want to talk music, give me a call here at the store. Come in, email me, let's talk. It'll be a good time. Thank you for watching. We'll see you next time.